when a group of 7 teenagers in Monroe County, Michigan, decided to explore an abandoned juvenile detention center on a bitter, freezing Thursday night. They were only looking for a cheap thrill. They expected to find nothing more than broken furniture, old gang graffiti fading on peeling walls, and maybe a few urban legends to tell their friends at school. But what they found hiding in the shadows of that concrete maze would give even the city's most seasoned and hardened homicide detectives recurring nightmares for years to come. What started as innocent teenage trespassing quickly escalated into the accidental discovery of a bizarre, ritualistic graveyard, a fatal dumping ground hidden in plain sight, and the terrifying unmasking of a secret, bloodthirsty cult led by a manipulative mastermind who proudly called himself the Grim Reaper. Today, you will understand step by step how a simple late-night meetup, fueled by text messages and false promises, ended in a brutal human sacrifice that shocked the entire United States. And the most terrifying, gut-wrenching part of this tragedy, the victim wasn't ambushed by strangers in a dark alley. She was delivered directly into the hands of her executioners by the one person in the world she trusted the most. Monroe County is home to a massive, imposing, and forgotten facility known to the locals as Boysville. It is a former youth detention center, a sprawling complex featuring dozens of decaying rooms, rusted iron bars, and labyrinthine corridors that seem to twist endlessly into the unknown. The entire grid has been without electricity for years, leaving the structure plunged into an eerie, suffocating pitch-black darkness the moment the sun goes down. It was into this terrifying, silent setting that the 7 high school students entered.
There's nothing there.
Armed only with the weak flashlights from their cell phones, they started recording everything, laughing nervously and joking loudly with each other, desperately trying to mask their underlying fear of the dark. But the fun didn't last long. As they ventured deeper into the belly of the facility, the air grew thick, cold, and incredibly heavy. In one of the larger, cavernous rooms at the end of a long hallway, their flashlight beams caught something unnatural on the dirty concrete floor.
I can't
There,
hold it.
resting ominously in the center of the room, was what looked like an old, heavy plywood board. The students paused. The silence was
God,
deafening.
This thing is heavy.
Slowly, they approached it.
Just keep
When they
pulling.
reached
I
down
can't
and pulled
believe
the
it's
heavy
this
wood
hard.
back to see what was hidden
all-
underneath, the unmistakable, sickening smell of death violently filled the air, hitting them like a physical blow.
Keep going,
Panic
don't
instantly
stop.
took over.
Move.
Screaming, they
Watch
dropped the
out.
wood and ran
Just keep
wildly
running.
back through the dark
They're
corridors,
right behind us.
tripping over debris and broken glass until they reached the safety of their car. They were terrified and out of breath. They knew perfectly well they were committing a crime by trespassing on restricted county property. But what they had just seen in that room was simply too horrifying, too evil to ignore. Trembling, one of the teenagers grabbed a phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher on the other end heard the pure terror in the boy's voice as he confessed they had found a dead body. The Michigan State Police immediately dispatched multiple cruisers to the scene. When the
Dispatch,
first
we are on
responding
scene.
officers arrived,
Suspect
their
is
headlights
inside.
cutting through the thick fog,
Copy.
they quickly
Secure perimeter.
realized they were facing a logistical nightmare. They were staring at a gigantic, multi-level building, plunged in total darkness, with a potentially armed and dangerous killer still hiding somewhere inside. Standard protocol went out the window. With weapons drawn and tactical flashlights mounted to their firearms, they moved in. Slowly, room by room, hallway by hallway, every creaking
Check your
floorboard sounded
six.
like a gunshot.
Clear.
After nearly a grueling hour of meticulously clearing the massive building, checking every closet and every shadowed corner, it was finally declared secure. But when the detectives finally returned to that large room and focused their high-powered forensic flashlights on the body hidden beneath the board, the gruesome scene paralyzed the entire team. Under the flickering, sterile light of the flashlights, what the officers saw didn't just look like a standard homicide. It didn't look like a robbery gone wrong. and it certainly wasn't a tragic overdose. It looked like a sick, twisted theatrical performance. The victim's body was covered in a glowing, highly disturbing substance. Her face, her neck, and her arms were intentionally and carefully painted with a metallic color, a shimmering shade of bronze or gold. Furthermore, the victim was surrounded by a perfect circle of thick, melted candles, the wax pooling and hardening on the cold cement floor. And along her legs, the killer had used a marker to draw bizarre, occult scribbles and symbols that no investigator recognized. The detectives exchanged chilling looks. That wasn't a crime of passion. That wasn't a gang initiation.
God, look
at this. The police had just stumbled upon a literal altar of human sacrifice.
Days, maybe weeks.
Using a high-tech portable fingerprint scanner right there at the crime scene, the victim's identity was quickly confirmed, and the results shocked everyone at the precinct. Her name was Kayla Sedoskey, a local 22-year-old woman. She was well known in the region, but not for anything bad. People described her as being incredibly sweet, somewhat naive, and having a genuinely good heart. She was the kind of person who would give you the shirt off her back. Unfortunately, those were the exact same traits that made her an incredibly easy target for sociopaths and manipulators. When the medical examiner and paramedics carefully examined the body, the true, brutal cause of death was finally discovered. What initially looked like severe blunt force trauma from a fall were actually devastating wounds caused by 3 point-blank gunshots directly to the head and back. Kayla had not fallen. She had been executed in cold blood, and judging by the advanced state of decay, she had been rotting in that concrete graveyard for almost 2 agonizing weeks. The timeline presented a massive problem for the investigation. If she had been dead for 2 weeks, the killer's trail wasn't just cold, it was frozen over. The police's only viable option was to somehow go back in time. Dozens of officers were assigned to confiscate and review hundreds of hours of grainy footage from traffic cameras, toll booths, and 24-hour gas stations surrounding the Boysville area. After days of exhaustion, staring at monitors until their eyes burned, they finally found a ghost on the tapes. The date was February 15th, exactly 1 day after Valentine's Day. In the black and white footage at exactly 11 at night, Kayla is seen walking alone near a quiet local bridge. The rain is falling lightly. Suddenly, a dark sedan, later identified as a black Mercury Milan, slowly pulls up right next to her. The brake lights glow ominously in the dark. The detectives held their breath while watching the tape, expecting to see her run away. But she doesn't run. She stops. She hesitates for a few seconds, looking at the passenger window, and then calmly opens the door and gets in. The interrogation room at the precinct buzzed with one terrifying question. What on earth made Kayla get into that dark car so confidently in the middle of the night? The chilling answer came when dispatch finally pulled the vehicle's license plates in the state system. The car belonged to Stephen Bales, a 44-year-old local man, and the detail that made the detective's blood boil with absolute rage was this. Kayla had an active, court-ordered restraining order against him. He was the one man in the world she feared the most. Wasting no time, heavily armed SWAT teams flew to his registered address, ready to break down the door with a battering ram and make the arrest. But upon kicking the door off its hinges and entering with lasers sweeping the room, they found the apartment completely empty. There was only a mocking, cynical handwritten note taped to the dirty wall, stating that Stephen had just left town for his honeymoon. The bird had flown, but as crime scene investigators began to thoroughly process the empty apartment, they realized this wasn't just the messy hideout of a fleeing suspect. It was the absolute nest of a cult. The air inside was stale and smelled heavily of cheap incense. Thin, dirty mattresses piled high on the floor proved that at least 7 different young, vulnerable people lived there, squeezed together like prisoners in a cell. Hidden notebooks scattered on the floor revealed the true, terrifying depth of Stephen's madness. He operated as a false god, a supreme leader in their broken lives. He controlled their finances, took their food stamps, and dictated who they could speak to. In his journals, he demanded to be called the Grim Reaper, and he had recently baptized his new bride as Lady Death. This macabre group of brainwashed youths proudly called themselves the Reapers, and they were willing to kill for him. The investigation hit a brick wall for 2 long weeks. The Reapers had vanished. But then, hundreds of miles away in Shelby, Ohio, the police received a frantic 911 call they certainly weren't expecting. A 19-year-old boy named Bryn fled barefoot in the pouring rain, using a stranger's phone to call for help.
Help!
He was hyperventilating, claiming he was being hunted, that he was held hostage by a deadly cult from Michigan, and that if they found him, he would be the next one to die. But Bryn had a trump card. He had proof. Sitting in the back of an Ohio police cruiser, Bryn showed the stunned detectives a hidden video he had secretly recorded on his phone. In the dark, shaky footage, a female cult member named Kayla is seen talking. Not only does she laughingly confess to pulling the trigger and shooting Kayla, but she aggressively brags about murdering 16 other people before her. 16 human bodies that, according to her, were never found. Michigan detectives rushed to Ohio to interview the boy. Bryn painted himself as the traumatized hero, the innocent victim who finally managed to escape the clutches of the Grim Reaper. But seasoned homicide investigators can smell a lie from a mile away. Something about Bryn's story was too rehearsed, too clean. When cyber forensics finally broke the encryption on the dead girl's phone back in Michigan, they discovered the ultimate, heartbreaking betrayal. For weeks leading up to the murder, Kayla had been texting a boy she liked. She had his contact saved affectionately in her phone as boyfriend, complete with red heart emojis. When detectives matched the phone number, it was Bryn's number. The barefoot, crying boy wasn't an innocent victim at all. He was the Judas. Stephen, the cult leader, knew perfectly well that Kayla would run screaming if she saw him approaching her on the street. So he devised a purely evil plan. He used Bryn as emotional bait. He forced Bryn to romance her to gain her trust and to arrange a late-night meetup near the bridge. When the young woman opened the door of the Black Mercury Milan that rainy night, she smiled, thinking she was finding love. She thought she was safe. She had absolutely no idea that the Grim Reaper was already sitting motionless in the pitch-black silence of the back seat, demanding his sacrifice. With Bryn's lies exposed, the detectives applied maximum pressure. The cult cannibalized itself in a matter of hours. Placed in separate cold interrogation rooms, everyone turned on each other to save themselves. The wife turned on the husband. The lookout confessed, and the trigger woman crumbled. Using the new intelligence, SWAT operators finally tracked Stephen down to a relative's house in North Carolina. When he refused to surrender, they shattered the windows and fired heavy tear gas grenades inside. Choking, blind, and crying, the grand manipulator who once called himself a god was forcefully dragged into the daylight and thrown into the mud. In the courtroom, the judge showed absolutely no mercy to the Reapers. The trigger woman, Kayla, and the Judas, Bryn, were both handed crushing sentences of 60 years in maximum security prison. And Stephen Bales, the mastermind who orchestrated the entire slaughter without ever getting his own hands dirty, was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Grim Reaper will rot in an iron and concrete cage, stripped of his power, until the end of his miserable days. Justice for Kayla was finally served. But for the detectives who worked the case, one chilling question remains entirely unanswered. If Kayla wasn't lying on that secret video, are there really 16 other bodies buried out there, just waiting to be found?